Pedro stood silently, his face unreadable, refusing to give Marcia the satisfaction of a reaction. At that moment, Selena caught sight of him through the window. Her expression shifted, her stoic mask melting as she rushed outside. "Pedro, my son, you're here." She enveloped him in a tight embrace, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've missed you so much. All this time, I've missed you. Tonight, we'll have a special dinner. You're staying with us this time, aren't you?" Pedro softened, holding his mother close. "I've missed you too, Mom." "Yes, I'm staying." Marcia, her venom momentarily disguised, stepped closer. "That's exactly what I was telling him, Mom," she chimed with a saccharine smile. "He has to stay this time. No excuses." Pedro watched her closely, the act so seamless it sent a chill down his spine. Marcia was a master manipulator, a serpent cloaked in charm. He said nothing, but the thought lingered in his mind, she's more dangerous than anyone gives her credit for. Marcia excused herself with a calculated smile. "I have to get to work now. I'll see you both at dinner." She left without another glance, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Once inside, Selena led Pedro upstairs. His old bedroom was untouched, preserved as if waiting for his return. He sank onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the moment settling over him. For the first time, he allowed himself to think, "I'm ready. I'm finally ready to start working at the Royal Hotel." That evening, the dining room was alight with the clink of silverware and the warmth of a long-awaited family meal. Pedro waited until the moment felt right. "Mom," he began, his voice steady, "I wanted to let you know I'm ready to work at the hotel." Selena's eyes lit up with pride, her smile broadening. "Are you serious?" "Pedro, I'm so proud of you. Is that why you've stayed away all this time?" Pedro nodded and placed a folder on the table. "Yes, Mom. Here's my diploma. I've earned a degree in business administration. I've been preparing myself for this moment. Now I'm ready to contribute. Just tell me where you'd like me to work." Selena's joy was palpable. "I can't believe it. You've made me so happy, Pedro. You have no idea how much this means to me." She turned to Marcia, her voice firm but warm. "Marcia, aren't you going to congratulate your brother?" Marcia's smile was tight, her tone clipped. "Of course. Congratulations, Pedro, on your degree." She paused, tilting her head as if in thought. "But I think it would be best if Pedro worked directly under me. He's never shown interest in the business before, and honestly, having a degree doesn't mean much without real-world experience." Selena's expression shifted, her pride in Pedro unshaken. "I disagree, Marcia. Pedro has worked hard for this, and I trust he's capable of contributing to the Royal Hotel in his own way. Tomorrow, I'll personally visit the hotel to decide where he'll work." "I already have an idea." Pedro stayed silent, observing the exchange between his mother and sister. His gaze remained on Marcia, reading the thinly veiled hostility in her eyes. He didn't need her approval, but he knew one thing for certain: Marcia was already scheming. "But Mom, it's not like that. You can't just give Pedro a section of the hotel to manage without any experience," Marcia protested, her voice sharp with frustration. Selena turned to her daughter, her expression steely. "Let me ask you something, Marcia. Who owns this hotel? Just so you know, I haven't yet decided who will sit in the presidential chair. The best one will." Marcia's mouth tightened, but before she could reply, Selena gestured for Pedro to follow. "Let's go, Pedro. I'm going to show you where you'll be managing." Selena led Pedro to the VIP restaurant, the jewel of the Royal Hotel. The concierges and staff, immaculately dressed and lined up in anticipation, were already assembled. Word had spread that Selena was making an important announcement. The manager stepped forward to introduce himself, even though Selena knew perfectly well who he was. "Good morning to all of you," Selena began, her commanding voice silencing the murmurs in the room. "The reason I've gathered you here is to announce that my son, Pedro, will be the head manager of this department. From now on, any concerns, needs, or problems you have will go directly to him." Pedro, standing beside his mother, was still taking it all in. He hadn't yet noticed Fernanda, who was standing toward the back, watching the scene unfold. Hello, Pedro said, addressing the team with measured confidence. As my mother mentioned, I'm Pedro. I'd like to know each of you by name. I might not remember them all right away, but with time, I will. So, let's start. Please introduce yourselves, one by one. Each concierge stepped forward, their introductions polite and professional. When the last one approached, it was Fernanda. Pedro's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, he felt as if the room had gone still. Her elegance and beauty were striking, but he quickly regained his composure. Tomorrow, I'll officially start working with all of you, Pedro said, his tone warm but firm. Anything you need, my office will always be open. Fred, he said, turning to the manager, I'd like to speak with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Does that work? Fred nodded enthusiastically. Perfect. I'll be there at 10 o'clock. The door to the VIP restaurant swung open, and Marcia strode in with her usual air of arrogance. Her sharp gaze swept over the room before settling on Pedro. Do you really think you have the capacity to manage the VIP restaurant, Pedro? She said, her voice loud enough for the staff to hear. Pedro understood her game immediately. She wanted to undermine him in front of his team. He smiled faintly, his tone calm but pointed. Why don't you wait until I've started working before deciding whether I'm capable or not? From her spot behind the other staff members, Fernanda watched Pedro closely, her interest piqued by the way he handled his sister. She remained strategically positioned, unnoticed by Pedro, quietly observing his every move. In the days that followed, Pedro threw himself into his work. He reorganized the operations of the VIP restaurant, streamlined processes, and introduced new uniforms for the staff to elevate the brand's image. When everything was set, he went to Marcia's office to inform her of the changes. You've barely started working, and you're already spending my money? Marcia sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. I'm not going to let you do that. I'll make your life so unbearable here that you'll beg to leave. Pedro remained calm, his tone steady. Marcia, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm simply letting you know what I'm doing. I'm not here to fight with you. Well, I am, Marcia snapped, her voice rising. If you think you'll be president, think again. Believe me, Pedro, I will do whatever it takes to throw you out of my hotel. Pedro didn't reply. He turned his back and walked out of her office, leaving her seething with rage. When Pedro returned to his office, he closed the door behind him, letting out a slow breath. The weight of the confrontation with Marcia pressed heavily on him, but he wasn't deterred. This was only the beginning, and he knew the battles ahead would test him like never before. Fernanda carefully balanced the tray as she entered Pedro's office. Her composed demeanor concealed the slight flutter in her chest. Good afternoon, sir. I brought the coffee you requested, she said, her voice soft but steady. Pedro, seated at his desk, glanced up, his expression momentarily softening as their eyes met. Thank you, he said, gesturing toward the table. You can leave it there. Fernanda placed the coffee on his desk with practiced grace. As she moved to leave, Pedro hesitated, his gaze lingering on her. Clearing his throat, he asked, Have you been working here at the Royal Hotel for a long time? A faint smile curved Fernanda's lips, polite but warm. It's been 3 years, sir. Is there anything else you need? Pedro was about to respond when the door flew open, and Marcia stormed in, her presence as disruptive as ever. Her face was flushed with anger. How dare you turn your back on me when I'm not finished talking to you, she demanded. I'm the one who decides where the money goes, not you. Pedro exhaled slowly, willing himself to remain composed. Marcia, if you haven't noticed, I'm not alone. Could you, for once, show some respect? Marcia's laugh was harsh, almost mocking. Respect? Do you want respect? Fine. Her gaze shifted to Fernanda, sharp as a blade. Why are you still here? You've delivered the coffee. Leave. You don't belong here. Fernanda, startled by the hostility, murmured an apology and turned toward the door. But Pedro's voice cut through the air, firm and unyielding. Fernanda, stay. She froze, unsure of what to do, and turned back toward Pedro. He was no longer the reserved man she had seen moments ago. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with barely restrained fury. Marcia, It's you who's going to leave my office. Now. Marsha's face turned crimson with rage, but she didn't argue. She spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Pedro turned back to Fernanda, his tone softening. I'm sorry you had to see that. Please, go back to work. I appreciate everything you do. Fernanda nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, sir. She left the office, her heart still racing from the encounter. When Fernanda returned to the VIP restaurant, her colleague approached her immediately. Fernanda, Marsha wants to see you in her office right away. Fernanda's stomach dropped. Did she say why? No, her friend replied, looking uneasy. Meanwhile, in her office, Marsha had already contacted HR to arrange Fernanda's termination. Her fingers drummed impatiently on her desk as she waited for the young woman to arrive. When Fernanda entered, she was met with a cold, unfeeling gaze. You wanted to see me? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Marsha didn't bother with pleasantries. Her words were clipped and laced with venom. I called you here to make two things clear. First, when I give you an order, you obey it immediately. I don't care who else is in the room. I'm the owner of this hotel, and I'm the one who pays you. Second, you're fired. Gather your belongings, stop by HR, and get out of my hotel. Now. Fernanda froze, the weight of the words crashing over her like a wave. But she began, her voice breaking. I don't care, Marsha interrupted. You've wasted enough of my time. Leave. Without another word, Fernanda turned and left the office. Her hands trembled as she walked back to the VIP restaurant to gather her things. After 3 years of dedication and flawless service, her career at the Royal Hotel was abruptly and cruelly ended. Pedro had no idea about the storm brewing in the Royal Hotel corridors after his clash with Marsha. Instead, he returned home, his mind preoccupied with Fernanda and the improvements he envisioned for the VIP restaurant. The changes weren't just about aesthetics, they were about redefining the space and elevating its image. He mulled over the details late into the evening, feeling a mixture of determination and unease. At dinner, the three of them gathered at the grand dining table. The clinking of silverware echoed softly in the otherwise quiet room. Selena broke the silence, her tone light but curious. Pedro, how was your day? Pedro set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. It was productive. I've been thinking about a few changes for the VIP restaurant. One of them is updating the uniforms. The current ones feel outdated. I want something more refined, something that reflects the prestige of the Royal Hotel. Selena nodded, her eyes brightening. That's an excellent idea. A polished appearance makes all the difference. She then glanced at Marsha, her tone expectant. What do you think, Marsha? Marsha, who had been quietly picking at her food, couldn't resist the opportunity to chime in. I think it's a waste of money, she said sharply. The uniforms we have now are perfectly fine. Why spend unnecessarily on something so trivial? Pedro looked at her evenly, his calm demeanor contrasting with her biting tone. Before he could respond, Selena intervened, her voice firm but measured. I disagree, Marsha. The Royal Hotel is a symbol of sophistication. Our staff should be dressed in a way that reflects the caliber of our guests. Pedro is absolutely right to want to make this change. Marsha exhaled audibly, setting her fork down with a faint clatter. If you think so, it will be so, she said, her tone dripping with reluctant acquiescence. But let's not pretend the expense won't be substantial. It's a change we could easily do without. Selena turned to her daughter, her expression unyielding. Marsha, anything that enhances the hotel's prestige is not a waste. The employees are the first people our guests see. Their appearance sets the tone for the entire experience. If Pedro believes new uniforms will achieve that, then it's a worthwhile investment. Marsha bit her lip, clearly holding back further arguments, while Pedro remained silent, observing the exchange. Selena shifted her attention back to him. Pedro, do you have anything else to add? Pedro shook his head slightly. No, that's all for now. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll head to my room. Have a good night. With that, he rose from the table, leaving Marcia fuming quietly and Selena watching him with a mixture of pride and curiosity. The next day, at lunchtime, Pedro called the VIP restaurant and placed his order. Along with his lunch, he specifically requested that Fernanda bring it to his office. A short while later, there was a knock on his door, but when the concierge entered, it wasn't Fernanda. The concierge carefully set the tray on his desk, her demeanor professional but distant. "Is there anything else you would like, sir?" she asked politely. Pedro glanced at the tray and then at her, his expression shifting. "Where's Fernanda? I specifically asked for her." The concierge hesitated, her voice lowering slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but Fernanda no longer works at the Royal Hotel." Pedro's brow furrowed in disbelief. "What? When did this happen, and why?" "Yesterday, sir. Your sister, Mrs. Marcia, called her into her office and sent her to HR. She dismissed her." Pedro's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained. "Thank you. You can return to your duties. Have a good day." The concierge nodded, excusing herself quietly. As the door closed behind her, Pedro stood, his frustration boiling over. Without hesitation, he stormed out of his office and down the hall, making his way to Marcia's door. He didn't bother to knock before pushing it open. "With what authority do you fire an employee who works in my department?" Pedro demanded, his voice sharp with fury. Marcia leaned back in her chair, her expression unbothered. "With the authority of the hotel owner," she replied coolly. Pedro's glare was icy. "You do not own anything, Marcia. Nothing has been decided yet. You fired that girl purely out of spite, and that's not just wrong, it's disgraceful. These people rely on their jobs. I'm hiring her back, and you will not interfere. Focus on your own duties and stay out of mine." Marcia's composure faltered slightly, but her tone remained cutting. "You can't ignore my orders, Pedro. She's already been dismissed, and I don't want to see her here again. I'll call HR right now and make sure she's not rehired." Pedro's expression darkened further. "Call whoever you want. She won't return unless she doesn't want to. Not because of your petty games." Marcia tilted her head, a sly smile creeping onto her lips. "Why are you so concerned about a concierge, Pedro? Do you have an interest in her?" Pedro's voice was low and laced with disdain. "Don't be pathetic." Without waiting for her response, he turned and left her office, leaving Marcia seething behind him. Pedro returned to his office, his mind racing. He logged into the staff database, scanning through the records until he found Fernanda's information, her address and phone number. Grabbing his phone, he dialed her number, but there was no answer. Frustrated but determined, he waited for an hour before trying again. This time, the call went through. "Hello." Fernanda's voice was soft, cautious. "Fernanda, this is Pedro. How are you?" His tone was warm but urgent. "I wanted to talk to you about your job. I want you to come back to the Royal Hotel and continue working with us." There was a pause before Fernanda spoke, her voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and hesitance. "I've already been to HR, Mr. Pedro. They paid me for my last days, and the dismissal was finalized. Your sister made it very clear that I'm no longer welcome. I don't think it would be wise to return. But thank you for thinking of me. It means a lot." Pedro felt a pang of frustration and regret at her words but kept his voice calm. "I understand, Fernanda. But this isn't over. Fernanda, you don't work for my sister, you work for me. I'm your manager, not her," Pedro said, his voice calm but firm. "Marcia can be impulsive, and I don't think it's right for you to lose your job because of one of her emotional outbursts. I will protect you, Fernanda. Please come back. We need people like you here at the Royal Hotel." Fernanda hesitated, her voice filled with uncertainty. "If I come back, it will only make things worse. She'll be furious, and she'll make my life unbearable at the hotel." Pedro's tone softened, his sincerity cutting through her doubts. "Please, Fernanda. This is my fault, and I feel terrible. You lost your job because of me." There was a pause before Fernanda replied, her words cautious but not dismissive. "Let me think about it until tomorrow. Could you call me then?" "Of course," Pedro said quickly. Please save my number. I will, she replied. Have a good day, sir. You don't need to call me sir, Pedro said gently. Call me Pedro. I'll call you tomorrow. After they ended the call, Pedro sat in his office, deep in thought. Marcia is terrified of me becoming president of the hotel, he mused. She must be hiding something dishonest or illegal. Why else would she be so desperate to push me away? His mind churned. I have access to everything recorded at the Royal Hotel now. If she's doing anything she shouldn't, I'll find it. When Pedro arrived home later that evening, Selena was waiting for him in the living room. She immediately noticed the worry etched on his face. Pedro, what's wrong? You look troubled, she said, her voice laced with concern. Hi, Mom, he replied, his tone weary. I am worried. What's going on? Pedro exhaled heavily and sat down across from her. It's Marcia. She had one of her outbursts again yesterday. This time, she fired one of our best concierges, someone from my department. She went straight to HR, and now it's done. I found the concierge's number and called her to ask her to come back, but I can tell she's scared. She's worried Marcia will make her life miserable if she returns. Selena frowned, her expression a mix of frustration and disappointment. But that's not even Marcia's department. She has no right to interfere. I know, Pedro said, his jaw tightening. That's what bothers me. She crossed a line, and I don't think it's just about this one incident. She's trying to sabotage me at every turn, and it makes me wonder, what is she so afraid of? Why does she want me gone so badly? Selena's face flushed with anger. Her voice, sharp and commanding, filled the room. I cannot believe Marcia has done this. Just then, Marcia strode in, her presence as haughty as ever. What have I done now? She asked with a smirk, feigning innocence. Selena's eyes narrowed, her tone cutting like steel. You have the audacity to ask me that. How dare you fire someone who doesn't even belong to your department? Marcia folded her arms, her expression hardening. She's intrusive and disrespectful. I was having a conversation with Pedro, and instead of leaving as she should have, she lingered, listening to our discussion. I didn't appreciate that, so I fired her. This isn't the first time she's overstepped. Selena's voice rose, her fury unmistakable. Tomorrow, you will call HR and reverse her dismissal. I want Fernanda back at the Royal Hotel. She has unparalleled wine knowledge. Our clients adore her expertise, and they come to her for advice. She's an asset to this hotel, a treasure. Marcia bristled, her frustration spilling over. I can't do that, Mom. You're undermining my authority. I am not undermining anything, Selena snapped. You will do exactly as I've said. Pedro, who had been standing quietly, finally spoke. Mom, let me handle it. Fernanda works in my department. I'll take care of it. Selena nodded, her voice softening as she turned to her son. All right, Pedro. Do everything you can to bring her back tomorrow. Offer her a raise if necessary. Marcia's face flushed with indignation. I can't believe what I'm hearing. Are you both serious right now? Selena turned to Marcia, her tone colder than ever. Marcia, listen to me very carefully. Never again will you take actions like you did with Fernanda. If you pull something like this again, the consequences will be severe. I won't hesitate to remove you from the position you currently occupy. The weight of Selena's words hung heavily in the room. Marcia's defiance flickered, but she said nothing. Pedro, his resolve firm, left the room with a single purpose in mind, to bring Fernanda back to the Royal Hotel. The next day, Pedro picked up his phone and called Fernanda. His tone was calm but laced with anticipation. Fernanda, good morning. I wanted to follow up with you. Have you decided about coming back to the Royal Hotel? There was a pause on the other end before Fernanda spoke. Her voice was hesitant but steady. Yes, I've thought about it. I'll come back. Pedro felt a rush of relief, a rare smile tugging at his lips. That's wonderful. You can start tomorrow. When you arrive, come straight to my office. Thank you, she said softly.